advice in that regards. I think it was E. Well, first off, someone asked, are we going to factor all of these? I think was the question. I'm assuming that's referring to this number 1 here. Well, if I can factor, I am going to factor. Because what property can you easily use once you factor? Zero product property, right? Because I can easily use that zero product property, I am going to factor. Did anyone identify any of these that we can't factor? C. C is the one that you can't factor. If you look at it with C, 0 is equal to x squared minus 10x plus 12. It's not just magically, I know I can't factor it. For the AC method, I'm going to start with A times C. Don't forget that. I've already seen people on the check at the end of today not remembering to do A times C. And so I need 12, or I have 12, and I need factors of 12 that can add up to be what? Not 10, negative 10, right? So one of the things that people in first block were asking about was, Mr. Kinney, how can I more efficiently find those factors? Remember this detail I told you yesterday, or Ms. Courtney brought up, one of the two of us, I think Ms. Courtney brought it up in here. What's the first factor that you could have for 12? 1 and negative 12. Well, remember if I do 1 times a negative 12, that's going to give me negative 12, not positive 12, right? Ms. Courtney, can you find whose phone that is and silence it? So 1 and negative 12, right? Well, that's not going to work here because I don't, what do I need to change one of these to? I need to make that 1 a negative as well. Because remember, they could both be positive, they could both be negative. So why do I know for this one they both need to be negative? Right, I'm adding them together to make negative 10, right? So I can only do that if they're both negative. Does that add up to be negative 10? Nope. So then I would look at negative 2 next. What would I look at with negative 2? Negative 6. Does that add up to be negative 10? No. Okay, so then what's the next one? Negative 3 and negative 4. And remember, if you're not sure what the other factor would be, you can just divide, right? If you take 12 and you divide it by this negative 3, you'll get that negative 4. Does that add up to be negative 10? No. There are no factors that add up to be the middle term, that negative 10. So as a result, what do we have to use instead? We have to use the vertex form, right? And so don't forget that. You know, you're not always going to factor. If I can factor, I'm going to. For example, when I look at 2x squared and 4x, that's not even a trinomial. Are there any common factors there? When I look at those, is there anything in common? 2x. So I can factor that 2x out, and what am I left with if I take the 2 and one of those x's out? Okay, so x there, and I took out that x, but I took out one of the 2 factors, so it's x plus 2. So that one's nice and easy to factor, right? If I can factor it, I'm going to factor it, because now what really important property can I use? Zero product property. Okay. Do I need to go further into this vertex form here? Or like what to do with the vertex form on C from this point? Yes? Okay, so we know we want vertex form. In order to use that vertex form, then I need, well, I'm going to use calculator. Before I even go to my calculator, I'm going to write out the vertex form. What is the vertex form of a quadratic? A minus 8 squared plus 8. Got to know that vertex form. Make your life easier to know that vertex form. But I don't magically know h and k. I can't get h and k straight from the standard form. Well, y'all haven't learned how to do that. So what are you going to do? Graph it. So I'm going to graph, and it's what? X squared minus 10x plus 12. What am I going to do? So So one, I will, so I'm gonna look for the minimum, right? The vertex is gonna be a minimum. I can zoom out like Momar said, but I wanna offer a word of caution, because this is what I see a lot of you doing as well. If I just zoom out, right? I can see it in this case, but did I need to zoom out horizontally? No. I only needed to zoom out in which direction? Vertically. And did I even need to go further up?
No, you go down.
I just need down, right? So this is where I would use the window / zoom feature and just change the window settings. I don't need to change the X at all. I just need to change the minimum Y. What's a good guess for the minimum Y?
40.
Negative what?
40.
Negative 40? More than I would have done, but it does get the job done. I would have said maybe like negative 10 or negative 15. But that gets the job done. Let's window / zoom. I would have probably done at most maybe negative 20. That gets it easily. So how am I going to, instead of just having to count, how am I going to find that vertex easily? Menu. And remember, the vertex is not, so I want to go, it's not one of the first options. I go to Analyze Graph, and the vertex is a minimum. Please remember, when it says lower bound, that just means that dashed line needs to be where in respect to the vertex?
Nope.
To the left, because it's horizontal is what we're moving. And so I've seen some students trying to get it like right there. You don't need to get it right there, you just need to be to the left. That's to the left. Then it asks for the upper bound, so it needs to be to the
Right.
See, I don't have to just kind of try to get right on it, I'm just going to go to the right. Notice how that point stops, right? When I'm over here, do you see how that point is right there on the line? And it keeps going until I get to a true minimum, and it stops. So there's my vertex. So, I don't need the factors, I need 5 comma negative 13. 5 is going to be the what?
H.
The H. The X value of the vertex. It is an X value, but it's the X value of the vertex. Negative 13 is my K. Alright. Now, I need y'all to remember, we are not just trying to get the vertex form, we're trying to get the vertex form so we can what?
Back.
Find the zeros or solve. So you don't just get the vertex form and oh, I'm magically done. Remember, the whole thing is that 0 is equal to, what's my A? Remember, A is what's in front of the x squared. If you need to, write out the standard form above it to help you remember. A is 1. Parentheses. X minus 5 squared minus 13. The big thing to remember is pay attention to your directions, because one student in first block kept saying, okay, so we're done? Well, have I done what the question asked me to do? No. I have created the vertex form so that I can now solve. And you have to remember, when we have the vertex form, how are we going to solve that equation? I already have vertex form.
Oh, you got subtract 13 from 0.
So subtract 13?
Add 13.
Yeah, I want to make that 0. So remember, and someone already said it, I think something about properties of equality, and we use the inverses with those properties of equality, right? I'm trying to create this 0 here. And so we get 13 equals, I don't need the 1 time, so I'm just going to write x minus 5 squared. And then we need to do the square root. And this is where I'm going to stop. You have to finish it from here. There is one important thing to remember. When you take that square root is going to just cancel the square. But what do I need to be careful about on the left-hand side? There's 2 possible solutions. Positive and a negative. So plus or minus the square root of 13 equals x minus 5. Now again, have I solved for x, or have I finished solving for x?
No.
No. There's at least one more step. But that's it up to this point. Any questions, comments, or concerns up to this point in this problem?
It's about the calculated part.
Okay.
Like, What's the point in using Windows settings if you're just gonna get the minimum with the calculator anyways? Cause you're not counting.
Sometimes it's easier to be able to zoom out to make sure it's a minimum or maximum first. And so like, I'll show you an example of one actually today why it's useful. Okay, that's a good question. Alright, from there, I think someone specifically asked about E. If that was you, could you share more about what your question was with E? Or am I, oh, is this page 91? Yeah, I think it's the only E we have. Look at that question again. Do we solve the A or leave it alone? Can you clarify that, whoever was asking that question?
So instead of when you have a 3, you solve for the 3 as well, because you're solving the equation.
You're talking about this 3?
Yeah.
Well, remember, that 3 is not a variable, that's a number, right? So I'm solving for x. I'm solving for what makes this equation true. I need to use that A. For example, if I'm going to factor it, I would do A times C, so 3 times 7, which is 21. So you need to use that in the factoring portion of it. Are there factors of 21 that could add to be a negative 22? Well, what's the very first factor? 1 and 21, but they both need to be negative. Would that add up to be negative 22?
Yep.
So that's where I would go from there with factoring.
No, I mean for vertex form, do you have to solve for A and vertex form?
Okay, so two points with that. I would not use vertex form here. If I can factor it, right, I found factors, so I would factor that. Secondly, and I'll look at an example where we do have to solve for A. If you have standard form, do you already know what A is? So you don't have to solve for, or figure out what A is in this case. Does that make sense? Like, this is A. It doesn't matter whether you have standard form, or factored form, or vertex form, the A for E is 3. Just like here with C, what was understood to be in front of this x squared? So the A was 1. That's why I wrote 1 right here in the place of A. Is that what your question is asking?
So you would drop down the 3 if you was in vertex form?
Can you say that one more
I
time?
mean, in vertex form,
Yes, if I were to convert that to vertex form, the A would be a 3.
so you wouldn't do nothing with it.
Well, it's not that you wouldn't do anything with it, you would have to use that as a part of your solving process later. Okay? We can look at one similar to what you're asking as a part of today. But I would factor in E, is where I would start. You good with that idea? Okay. So so I guess B here would answer your question. In this problem, A times C would be negative 18. Are there any factors of negative 18 that are going to add up to 24? No. So we want to recognize that. So I'm not going to factor here. Instead, I'm going to look to do what? I'm going to use vertex form. Okay? So I'm not going to work this one all the way out, but I want to recognize I want vertex form. To me, what do I already know A is from the standard form? So A is 3. So this would be 3 times x minus something squared plus something. And so I already have what A is. I need to find h and k. And that's where I'm going to graph it. Does that make sense? And so I would find the h and the k. So 3x squared plus 24x. What's the last part? Plus 6, minus 6? Minus 6. Okay. And so Momar, I think one of the things you were saying earlier is, if I analyze this graph for a minimum, I can just do it like this right away. Is that what you were hinting at? You were just going to zoom out because it was, yeah. I just want to do that. So notice, to me, in this case, I'm going to erase this information for C. So for this problem, I have -4 comma -54, that's h, and that's k. Okay? So the factored form of this would be x, and then what? Would be minus a -4 or +4 squared, then what? And then plus a negative or minus 54, right? You get up to that point? So, when I look at this, now first off, I want to point this out. All I've done right now is go from standard form to vertex form. But what is number 2 asking us to do? Determine the root. So I still need to equal to something. What's it supposed to be equal to? Can I just magically put a 0 in the place of y?
Oh, yeah.
Not magically, but if it's called a root, another way to think about a root is a 0, right? Meaning that the y value is 0. With roots slash zeros, y equals 0, right? So it's not just magical, right? So notice to me from here, that 3 matters a good bit because when I add 54, now I do think this is something a lot of us should pay attention to because I see a lot of us making a mistake from here. What's the next thing I need to do to solve this equation? I'm going to tell you the answer is not take a square root.
Divide by 3.
Multiply by 1/3 or divide by 3. Remember, the general rule of thumb is that start with your variable. The first thing happening to x is adding 4. Then x plus 4 is squared. Then after x plus 4 is squared, we are multiplying by 3, following that order of operations idea. So that's what I need to undo. So notice that a does matter when solving. If the a is 1, it's already a 1, but I need to make this a 1. Does that get to what your question actually was? Okay. Sorry that took me so long to get there. But you get it now? And then you would finish solving from there. Alright. Not going to spend too long. I do want to point this out. If I look at 2, right here. 1 times 3 is 3. Are there factors of 3 that add up to be 9?
No.
Definitely not. So am I going to factor for that problem?
No.
Nope. Okay, so let's look at the vertex form for this. Is it x squared plus 9x plus 3? How about that vertex form? You want to use that vertex? You don't want to use that vertex? I mean, I could. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if I got decimals, I ain't wanting to use it. So, if the vertex isn't super pretty, I don't want to use vertex form. I can't factor it, so I got to have another way to solve it, right? Can I say again? Well, remember, we can't use standard form. Anybody remember what I already said and hinted at yesterday that we're going to use? So completing the square is just to get the vertex form. Good thoughts, but no. Why don't you go look at activity 4.3 in your textbook, or 5.3, sorry. The quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is something that we can use. Xavier, you awake? Okay. The quadratic formula is something you can use when you can't use the other methods. So keep that in mind. Now, I also want to point this out. No matter what form you're using, you can actually solve these questions with very, very little work. Anyone know what I mean by that? This is more of a way to check yourself. Remember, we're trying to find roots. We want the quadratic equal to 0. So what could I look for on the graph? The zeros, which are also called x-intercepts, right? If I were you, every time I solve these problems using the quadratic formula, using the vertex form, using factored form, I'm going to check my x-intercepts. If you use Desmos, you literally can just click on those points. On the TI Inspires, you just need to go to 0. Right? So you already know what your solutions should be when you work this problem out. Please understand, I want you to do it graphically just to check. However, this is a great way to check your answers. And if you have no clue how to solve the problem using factored form or vertex form or quadratic formula, which you should be able to do at least one of those, Tyrese, I need the headphones out, please. Could you always graph it to try to find some roots? Yes, Mr. Kenny. Thanks, guys. I just want you to be aware of that, right? You can always graph. Good job. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns at this point before we continue? Been talking a lot, so I want to quit talking and let y'all work some soon. Hopefully, this review, number one, is very easy. There was a question that came up in first block that y'all probably should have asked if you had actually already attempted this problem. Number two says, write a quadratic equation for the parabola that passes through this point with those roots. What do you need to do to get started? Write what? The form of the quadratic equation, but which form are you going to use? Why factored form? You got two roots, right? So remember, pay attention to what's given to you. You got two roots, so you're going to use factored form here. However, you're not given an equation, so do you know what A is? No. So remember, that's why you need this extra point. Once you write your factored form, that -2 can be substituted in for which variable? X. 12 can be substituted in for y, or f of x, right? And then your only unknown would be a, and you can solve for a. So keep that in mind for this problem. You have roots, so you're going to use factored form. Substitute your x and y in to find a, and write your final factored form. Make sure you answer the final question. Questions, comments, or concerns? Good talk. All right. So, using the quadratic formula. With today's check at the end of class, you're going to be able to look at the quadratic formula. Tomorrow, you will not be able to look at the quadratic formula for the understanding check. So what does that mean for you? Huh? So remember I said this at the beginning, if you're paying attention, that today is just a quick little check to see how well you're doing. It's not for a grade. Tomorrow's the one for the grade. Okay? It's in the book. Good, activity 5.3. And we're going to break this down a little bit. So you need to go back, I think it's like 87 or 88 maybe. Maybe a hair before that. 85. 85, wow, I was way off, my bad guys. Okay, so here is the quadratic formula. What formula are you talking about? Oh, factor form?
I know the x, 1 minus R2.
X minus
It's something like that.
R1 times X minus R2. What goes in front? A. By the way, Jaquan, do you have your yellow graphic organizer out? Look at the very first thing on there. Right? Trying to give you all the resources you need to be successful. Use them. Okay, so here's the quadratic formula, though. Looking at this statement, first off, I do want to write this out. X. It's okay, I don't want to teach. Hello? I do, yes ma'am. She seems so. Okay. Yes ma'am. Okay. Yes ma'am. Bye.
It's already open.
Okay. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. Couple of quick things. One, I'm not going to give it to you. You gotta know this. Secondly, where does a, b, and c's coming from? Standard form. The only thing, what place that we ever see A, B, and C is in what form? Standard form, right? So all those letters are coming from the standard form. That's it. look at this information given. Is there anything important we need to pay attention to with the standard form in order to be able to use this quadratic formula? Read through it. Okay? Think I can use the quadratic formula here?
Yeah. No.
As it currently is, let me ask you that way. I hear some people saying no. Any ideas why?
You have to move the 18.
Okay, be careful, not move the 18. We need to make the 18 a what? 0. So we use property of equality. Notice this statement right here. You can use this to solve any quadratic equation of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It has to be equal to 0. So in general, when we're dealing with quadratics, what do we always want that quadratic to equal? 0. You have to have the factored form equal to 0 so you can use the zero product property. You have to have the standard form equal to 0 to use the quadratic formula. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to here is, this does not mean that this is always a negative. This means the opposite of B. So right here, B is already negative. What's the opposite of negative 4? Positive 4. So when I put that, it's actually going to be a positive 4 because it is the opposite of negative 4 is what that really is. Okay? And then we would substitute in that negative 4 here. So negative 4 squared and continue on. So, a couple of quick notes that I do want you to make next to this is one, notice the worked example here. We have that standard form equal to 0. We have a equals negative 4, b equals negative 40, c equals negative 99. For me, you don't need to do all these steps. You don't. What I need you to do is, you definitely need to identify A, B, and C. You definitely need to show me everything substituted into the equation. Because you could very easily make calculator mistakes later, but if you can show me everything substituted in, then I know you at least know how to use it, you just made a mistake in the calculator. So you need to show me this. I don't care about this step. I think this is dumb. We have calculators for a reason. Can you plug everything underneath the radical in at the same time? Yeah. So for me, I would go straight from this step to this step where I have everything substituted into the calculator. Jeez, right here. When you see it. Okay. So when I'm looking right there, and I'm going from that top step down to that middle one, I'm going to put it into the calculator and be good to go. I will go into a little bit more detail here in a second, but what I want us to do quickly, right, so I'll break down how to do all that there. What I want y'all to do is look here at this case, and we're at least going to have you start within small groups, come back together, and then go from there. It says the Seaside Serpents baseball team has a new promotional activity to encourage fans to attend games, launching free t-shirts. They can launch a t-shirt in the air with an initial velocity of 91 feet per second from 5.5 feet off the ground, which is the height of the team mascot. So, they've given all that information here to start us off, and they've given us this equation that can be modeled with quadratic function. Notice the 91 shows up here, the 5.5 here. Don't stress about all those numbers. If I ever ask you to do anything, I'll give you the equation. What I need us to focus on is where it says t is the time in seconds and h of t is the height of the launch t-shirt in feet. They want to know how long it will take for a t-shirt to land back on the ground after being launched if no fans grab it before then. So what can I do to start answering that question? Or what do you know that might be substituted in? Okay, so remember, the 91's already there. It's a good note, but the 91's already in that equation.
Would you substitute further out for h times t?
Okay, so if h of t is 5.5, You're saying that the t-shirt is how high in the air?
Well,
5.5 feet, right?
yeah,
Is that what we want, the t-shirt to be 5.5 feet in the air?
no,
Wouldn't it be zero?
Say it again,
Wouldn't
David?
it be zero?
What would be 0?
H of T.
Why would h of t be 0?
That's, alright,
Is h of t 0, the height 0 at the highest point? Maybe the lowest point. It's not where it starts. Remember, the t-shirt starts at what height? 5.5 feet. What is the question asking us to find? When it hits the what? Ground. When that t-shirt hits the ground, what's the height? 0 feet. That's what we want to notice there, right? H of t equals 0 when the shirt hits the ground. And so I want you to notice, in order to use that quadratic formula, our quadratic expression has to equal what again? Has to equal 0. Well, we don't get to magically make it equal 0, but in this case, the height is supposed to be 0. So we get 0 equals what? Be careful, negative 16t squared. That can make a big difference. Plus what? 91 t. So, okay, I do want to pause. I want to clarify this. If I were to graph, I would have to use x. But in this problem, I would want to use t. Does anyone know why? Time. One thing I'll point out is, I don't know if you ever noticed this, 1, I always make my plus symbol pretty small. 2, with my t's, I always do the little curve at the bottom, the little hook, to make it clear that it's not a plus symbol. That can help. So plus 91t plus 5.5. Okay? So at this point, I need to substitute in for the quadratic formula. Actually, I do want to pause before I continue there. I'm not just going to always use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula, you just memorize the equation, you substitute things in, but it is easy to make calculator mistakes with the quadratic formula. What were the methods I recommended first to look at? So graphing is a great method that I will always actually use, but unfortunately most college professors won't let you just use a graph. You have to do it algebraically. So, what was an algebraic method that we could use to first start trying to solve a quadratic? Factor it, right? So I would need to look at this in the AC method. Negative 16 times 5.5, what does that equal? Negative 88. Can I get some confirmation from others? Yes, yes. Anybody know any factors of negative 88 that will add up to be the positive 91? Nope. So can I factor? Nope. Okay, so maybe use what? Vertex, so what am I going to do? Graph it. Okay, so